The plane tickets are $1,950 per person, my mother said, her voice light as if she were discussing a lunch salad, without a hint of sarcasm, without the slightest sign she realized she had just dropped a boulder into a pond already stretched tight like a drumhead. I sat there, still holding a glass of water I hadn't drunk, and listened as my sister let out a giggle like Mom had just told a charming little joke. No one looked at me, but everyone knew exactly who that sentence was for. Welcome to Family Ashes, where family secrets are no longer hidden, where kinship sometimes feels like a one-sided contract, signed in trust and paid for with a bank account. If one day you realize you are not a daughter, not a sister, not even family, but just a walking wallet, an emotional credit card, would you keep paying to stay, or would you walk away and watch it all collapse the way it was meant to? Leave a comment if you've ever been called selfish just because you dared to say no once. Because sometimes, saying no isn't selfish. It's the first time you choose to live for yourself. I'm 33 years old, living in Dallas, working in marketing for an organic food company. It sounds gentle, but that job used to be my whole world, a world I clung to so I could believe I still had worth, that I was still moving forward even when everything in my family seemed to be moving backward. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, if I thought about others enough, then they would see. They would realize. They would love me not because I paid, but because I was a daughter, a sister, a part of this family. I spent 2 years saving up for a trip to Italy. Not the Instagram kind. No flowing dresses in front of cathedrals. I just wanted us to sit down together at a small restaurant in Rome, to get lost together in Venice, to laugh at nothing on a local train. I thought it could be a new beginning. A chance to mend something that had been cracked for a long time, but no one dared to name. That evening, we met at a fancy Italian restaurant downtown. Mom picked the place, not for the food, but because it had white tablecloths, imported olive oil, and a menu hard enough to pronounce to make people feel important. I made the reservation, paid in advance, like always. No one asked, and no one thanked me. I guess they thought it was just expected. I arrived on time, wearing a simple blouse, light makeup. Not to impress. Just because I still held out hope, faint as it was, that tonight would be different. That this would be a real family dinner. Mom sat across from me, my sister beside her, my dad looking at his phone, and my brother nodding like we were co-workers who just ran into each other in a lobby. When the main course arrived, truffle mushroom pasta I had chosen because I remembered Mom once said she liked the smell, she set down her fork, looked directly at my sister, and said, not loudly, but clearly, Italy is for those who truly contribute. No one responded. No one looked at me. But I knew. I knew instantly. They had decided to go without me. And no one felt the need to hide it anymore. I got home when the streetlights outside my balcony had already turned that tired yellow hue. The apartment was as quiet as always, no voices, no TV, no one waiting for me. I dropped my bag on the chair, took off my coat, sank to the floor and stared at the small rug in front of me, the one I bought during a discount sale, only because Mom said it looked cleaner than bare wood. At the time, I thought she was right. Now, I wasn't so sure. I stood up, washed my face with cold water, and opened my laptop. Without hesitation, I pulled up the flight confirmation email and went through every single platform I had used to plan the Italy trip, the trip I'd been dreaming about for 2 years, saving every penny from end-of-year bonuses, from extra freelance contracts, from skipping little things I wanted just to save it for family. I canceled every plane ticket, every hotel night, every tour reservation I had spent weeks researching, comparing prices, reading reviews, making detailed notes. I thought I would cry. But I didn't. I just felt hollow. Each click felt like erasing an old dream, not painful, just quiet. I knew I'd lose money, and yes, over $6,000 vanished as if it had never existed. But it was the cheapest price I had ever paid to get back the part of me I had given away. Once everything had disappeared from the screen, I moved on to the part that was less dramatic, but more essential, changing passwords. The booking apps, the shared itinerary email account, the financial tracking apps, my mom, dad, and both siblings all used to have access. One by one, I deleted every linked device, every shared permission. Each familiar name appeared, then vanished. And with every click of remove access, I felt a little lighter. Not light as in carefree, but the exhausted kind of lightness, like someone who finally gets to drop a heavy backpack after a long, uphill journey. I finished everything around 3 a.m. I wasn't sleepy. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't even relieved. Just quiet inside. As if my brain needed to reboot its entire system after a short but total shutdown. I went into my room and lay down without turning off the light. At 5:17, my phone buzzed. A text. My brother. Just one line, can't check in. Call the airline. No greeting. No question. Not even a single sis. I read it, then flipped the phone over and set it on the table. Not because I was angry, but because I was too used to being seen as tech support, as a 24/7 help desk, as the one who always handles logistics but never gets to sit down and eat the actual meal. 3 hours later, the call came. My dad. I answered. Partly out of curiosity. Mostly because I was too tired to avoid it. He didn't greet me. Didn't ask anything. He just threw the words into my ear, clipped and cold, with a strange flatness that made them feel even sharper, out of the apartment in a week. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. The dial tone that followed sounded more like a heart monitor than a call ending. The apartment I was living in belonged to them, that was true. But I wasn't living there for free. I paid rent. $1,000 a month, on time, every time. Below market rate, sure. But in exchange for that family discount came an unspoken list of rules I had to follow: no turning on the AC without permission. No having friends over in the evening. No changing the curtains without checking with mom. Once I replaced the dining table because the old one was rotting, and my dad told me I was acting ungrateful. That apartment, though it had their name on the deed, was where I lived, and yet not once did it feel like home. Now, they were taking away the only thing that had kept me tethered, shelter. And strangely, I didn't feel like I was being kicked out. I felt released. I started packing the next morning. Didn't wait for the weekend. Didn't wait for another call. I got up at 6, no alarm, no coffee. Just stood in the kitchen and looked around, at the apartment I had always told myself was temporary, even though I'd been there over 2 years, living like a quiet tenant in someone else's house. I opened my closet. There were clothes I hadn't worn in ages but still kept, just because once mom said, "That looks good on your figure." I folded each item, slowly and deliberately, like I was preparing to leave a memory I didn't want to bring with me, but didn't want to leave in disarray either. By noon, I dragged 3 suitcases out from under the bed. They were still dusty, I'd never had a real reason to use them. I was always waiting for the perfect vacation, waiting for work to settle down, waiting for family approval. And in the end, they were the reason I'd never gone anywhere. When I folded the cream-colored dress, the one I planned to wear in Florence if the weather was cool, I felt like I was folding a promise only I still remembered. I don't know how everything went so smoothly after that. That same afternoon, I saw a listing in a housing group, a small, furnished apartment in the Bishop Arts District, available immediately. The owner was an engineer who had just accepted a job in Vancouver. I messaged him. He called me for a video tour within 10 minutes. 3 hours later, I had Venmo'd the deposit. No one asked who my parents were. No one asked for income verification. No one cared if I intended to stay long-term. I had lived 33 years as someone who always had to explain. To my job. To my family. Even to myself. And for the first time, I did something without justifying it to anyone. I moved out in 2 days. So fast I'm not even sure I truly felt the process. I only know that by the evening of the second day, as I was kneeling on the floor of my new apartment, sealing up a box of books with cheap tape I bought at Dollar Tree, I heard a knock on the door. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. The way people knock when they know they're not welcome, hesitant, but not remorseful, I'd heard it too many times in my life. I opened the door. My mother was in front, holding a container of Danish pastries as if this were a peaceful Sunday morning, as if that phone call 3 days ago, the one telling me to move out, had never happened. My father stood behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the wall to my right like he couldn't bear to look me in the face. From her purse, I could hear my sister's voice over speakerphone, a group call. The whole family was in attendance. "We think that," my mother began, and I already knew what she was going to say. Things might have gone too far. My father jumped in, his voice low and lecturing, "You're clearly going through an emotional phase. But if you can calm down, we're willing to forgive and move past this." Forgive. They came to bestow forgiveness on me, the only one who hadn't done anything wrong besides refusing to be used again. I didn't interrupt. I didn't shut the door. I sat down on the floor, leaned my back against the wall, and looked at them, one by one. They took seats on the chairs across from me. No one said anything else. So I started talking. I told them about the times I stepped in to cover my dad's loan when insurance wouldn't pay enough. About the vacation I canceled because Mom cried and said, "The whole family can't be happy if you're not there." About the months I secretly wired money to my sister so she wouldn't get kicked out of the apartment she called her first step toward independence. About the birthdays I missed, the plans I scrapped, the pieces of myself I erased just to keep the family stable, or at least keep them from tearing each other apart. "You don't get to call that drama," I said. Because if that was a show, I was the director, the actor, and the only audience who stayed until the end. They looked at me, my mom clutching the pastry box so tightly it was warping, my dad shifting his eyes around the room, my sister silent on the other end of the line. "You're rewriting the past," my mom whispered. "You're burning bridges," my dad added. "No," I replied, "I'm just choosing not to walk across the rotting bridge you kept forcing me onto." I stood up, picked up the last box near the door. They didn't stop me. I didn't need to push them out. I didn't eat the Danish. Didn't keep the plastic container. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it. Gently. And on the other side was a kind of silence that, for the first time, didn't make me feel alone, it made me feel free. A week after I moved out, I started to believe that maybe they finally got it. No apology emails. No cryptic Facebook posts hinting at which child had failed them. No relatives calling to check in. The silence was so complete, I started to doubt it. Like a room where the fan, the fridge, and the dripping tap have all stopped, and you're not sure if you should feel relieved or unnerved. I used that time to sort out my new life. Bought a small bookshelf from a flea market. Sanded and painted a second-hand pine dining table. Every day I tried to live just a little differently than the day before. Not drastically, but enough to feel like I was moving forward. I didn't dare call it peace yet. But at least, it no longer felt like a battlefield. Then one Saturday morning, as I was wiping down the windowsill, there was a knock at the door. 3 knocks, hesitant. I walked over without looking through the peephole. I opened the door, and I knew immediately that silence wasn't surrender. It was just a pause, a moment of quiet before the next blow. My younger brother was standing there. Gray hoodie, sunglasses, backpack slung over one shoulder like he was dodging debt or running from something. But his eyes were the same, cold, quiet, and a little confused, like a kid handed a task too heavy for him. "Can we talk for a minute?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before stepping inside. My small apartment barely gave him space, 3 steps and he was already perched on the edge of the sofa I had just reupholstered 2 days earlier. He pulled an envelope from his backpack and placed it on the table like he was presenting a business proposal. I stood still. My hands still dusty from cleaning. He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of neatly printed, carefully stapled documents. "This is the proposal," he said. "A $10,000 loan. Low interest. Detailed 12-month repayment plan. Signed by everyone." I didn't touch the papers. Just sat down across from him, silent. Holding a glass of water I had poured that morning. He began to speak. Slowly at first, then quicker. About how our parents were 2 months behind on the mortgage. About the credit card that had just been frozen for missed payments. About mom getting her hours cut at work, about our sister being under internal investigation for a company card issue. He didn't go into detail, and I didn't ask. I listened. Each word landed in my ears without weight, like rewatching an old play you used to cry through, but this time, you're just observing tired actors on stage, realizing you're no longer in the audience. Then he said, "We're not here to beg. This is a loan. There's a contract. A timeline. A commitment. We're doing it right this time." I nodded. Like I was evaluating an investment proposal. I looked at my brother, the same person who once fell asleep in my car after a college party, who once asked me to cover his final tuition bill because he forgot the deadline. I used to think if I helped him enough, he would grow up. But he didn't. He only learned how to sound like an adult. The core hadn't changed. I set the glass down on the table, looked him in the eye. No anger. No pity. Just one word, no. He froze. A few seconds passed like even he couldn't believe what he just heard. "What did you say?" "No. I'm not helping anymore." His face shifted. Like I had just ruined a script he'd been carefully told to deliver. "If you don't help, things are going to get really bad," he said. His voice tightened, just enough pressure to stir guilt, to activate that old reflex of responsibility. I leaned back in my chair, still holding his gaze, still using that steady voice. Things already got bad. They got bad the moment I became a wallet instead of a sister. He didn't reply. Just gathered the stack of papers, slipped them back into the envelope, and put it in his backpack. I stood up, walked over, and opened the door. No goodbye. No hug. Just a stretch of space between two people who once called each other family. He walked past me without looking back. I closed the door. Slowly. Gently. Not out of politeness, but because I no longer felt the need to do anything quickly. I had spent my whole life rushing for others. Now, I wanted everything to slow down, just enough for me to feel it, that finally, I was sitting in the right place, inside the boundary I had drawn for myself. I didn't realize the storm was coming until it was already right at my door, not with thunder or wind, but in waves of notifications lighting up my phone screen. "Aunt Carla has sent you a message. Aunt Myra just commented on a post. You have 5 missed calls from an unknown number." I was holding a cup of freshly brewed coffee, still hot. I had just sat down at my desk when the phone started vibrating like crazy. At first, I thought it was a system glitch. But then the messages started appearing, short, loaded, and heavy as stone. "Your mom is heartbroken. How could you do this to the woman who raised you? Come on, she's still your mother. No one deserves to be treated like this, Rachel." I had no idea what was going on. I opened Facebook, even though I barely use it anymore, and there it was. My mother's post. A gray background with white text, no names tagged, but there was no need. Some people are only children when they're still useful. But God sees everything. I read that line over and over. Then I scrolled down to the comments. Familiar faces, distant relatives, old friends, even people who once hugged me at Grandma's funeral, now sending hearts and sympathy to my mother. I know how it feels to be abandoned. Kids these days only think about themselves. Praying for strength for you, sis. So sad. Maybe one day she'll realize her mistake. Each comment felt like a blade sliding into a different part of me. No one asked what had happened. No one messaged me to hear the other side. They just chose to believe the first voice, the one who spoke up first, and that, like always, was my mother. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just felt like I was standing in a crowded room where everyone was pointing, staring, whispering, but no one was offering me a mic. It felt like a family courtroom where I was tried in absentia. I didn't post anything. Didn't write a status. I just called Uncle Jeff. He was the only person in the family who ever looked at me like a human being, not a function. The one who quietly stood in the back at my graduation when my parents claimed traffic. The one who texted, "Are you okay?" instead of, "When will you send the rent this month?" When he picked up, I didn't have to explain much. I just said, "Everyone's getting it wrong." And then I told him. Everything, the Italy trip, the loan request, the threats, even the near identity theft. I didn't try to justify anything. I just laid out the truth, like someone rearranging a table that had been badly set. Uncle Jeff was silent for a long time. I thought he might be deciding who to believe. But then he exhaled, very softly. "Jesus. And your mom told us you were unstable." That afternoon, he posted something. No tags. No shade. No venom. But clear enough that no one could misread it. It's heartbreaking to see people twist the truth just to stay in the victim role. I'm proud of my niece for setting boundaries. Not everyone can do that. I wish more of us had the courage to do it sooner. That post spread through the family group like a match tossed into damp straw. Some of the comments on my mom's post started disappearing. A few people messaged me privately, apologized, said they had no idea, said they too had been the one who got blamed in this family. A cousin I barely talked to messaged, "Thank you for speaking up. I'm living in the exact pattern you just got out of." I didn't reply to all of them. I didn't need anyone to defend me. I just needed a space where my voice existed. And for the first time in my life, I felt heard, not because I screamed, but because I'd been quiet long enough. My mom's post vanished 2 days later. No apology. No correction. No explanation. Just quietly taken down like it had never happened. But I still remember. Not out of bitterness. Just so I don't forget, some wars don't start with explosions. They begin with a status update. And if you don't tell your story yourself, someone else will tell it for you, in a way where you won't even recognize yourself anymore. About 3 weeks after my mother's post disappeared from Facebook, when the messages from relatives began to slow and my inbox was no longer a dumping ground for unsolicited advice, I started to believe that maybe things were actually settling down. Not forgiveness, not for them, not for me, but a quiet ceasefire. The kind no one announces, but everyone understands, enough. I lived like someone who'd just survived a flood. Still mopping up, still gathering broken pieces, but at least the ground was dry. I started working again. Sent off drafts to clients, took on a few small gigs. In the evenings, I read books, or played wordless music, or just sat and watched Olive, the cat I adopted after moving out, pacing around like she was inspecting whether I was doing okay. Then one Wednesday afternoon, while I was boiling water for tea, I got an email from the credit monitoring service. I assumed it was a routine alert. It wasn't. Subject, urgent, fraud alert, suspicious payday loan application. I opened the email. A payday loan application for $3,500 had just been submitted under my name, with my social security number, my birth date, and the address, my old address. The apartment I used to rent from my parents. I didn't panic. I didn't drop the kettle. I just stood still. Like my body needed a few seconds to ask, "Am I dreaming?" Then I logged into the system, downloaded a copy of the loan application. And everything matched. Every detail. Not a single number off. Not a letter out of place. It couldn't be a stranger. Not a hacker. No one outside my family had access to that information, unless they had once sat across from me at the dinner table, once held my insurance card to fill out medical forms, once said, "Let me hold on to this, just to be safe." I didn't shake. But I felt cold. The kind of cold that rises from the inside out, like someone had poured a bucket of ice water over my memories. I sat down in the chair, didn't turn on the light, let the gray dusk fill the room. Olive jumped into my lap. I didn't pet her. I just let her sit there, the only warm, living thing left that still believed I was someone worth loving. I remembered the last time my mother held my hand. I was 19, in the hospital after a car accident. She gripped my hand, not to ask if I was in pain, but to ask whether the insurance had been updated. I remembered my father once saying, "Family is the only place that will never abandon you." I used to believe that. I believed it so hard I abandoned myself to keep holding on to them. Now they hadn't abandoned me. They had tried to steal me, in the literal sense. I didn't call my mom to ask why. I didn't text my sister to ask, "Was it you?" I didn't send an email with the subject line, "We need to talk." Because I knew, if someone is willing to use your identity to file a payday loan application, any conversation you try to have will only scratch the surface. The cracks run deeper than language. I froze all my credit. Filed fraud reports with the 3 major credit bureaus. Added alerts to my record, so if anyone attempted to access my credit again, I'd be notified immediately. I changed all my passwords. Reset my security questions. I even deleted old documents from cloud storage, not because I was scared, but because I was too tired to keep anything they might have once touched. I didn't make a scene. Didn't post about it. Didn't confront anyone. I didn't need to know who did it. I just needed to know, if someone is cruel enough to do it, they're shameless enough not to regret it. I reboiled the now cold kettle. Took a sip of tea. The slight bitterness on my tongue made everything clearer. I was no longer one of them. I was a target. A name that could be turned into fast cash if someone needed a loan. A living memory, valuable only when exploited. And in that moment, I felt completely free. Not free in a poetic sense. But a cold, stinging kind of freedom, the kind you feel when you know, for sure, there's no one behind you anymore. But at least, you know you'll never have to look back again. A month went by. No messages. No phone calls. No sign that anyone in the family was still looking for me. My inbox was no longer flooded with alerts from banking apps, no requests to borrow money, no emails just to probe whether I had cooled off yet. No one knocked on my door. No one asked where I was, what I was doing, or how I was living. At first, I didn't know what to do with the silence. It didn't feel like peace. It felt like standing in a room where the ceiling had just collapsed. You'd survived, but dust still floated in the air, and you didn't know whether to keep walking or just sit down, breathe, and wait for everything to settle. I started living hour by hour. No more long-term plans. No more call home, keep in touch, show some gratitude. In the mornings, I made coffee. Opened the window. Olive, the cat I brought home from the shelter, would jump onto the sill and stretch out in the sun like she was the true owner of the apartment. Sometimes I sat next to her for hours, saying nothing, just breathing in sync. She didn't need anything from me except food, clean water, and my presence. She didn't need me to sacrifice. Didn't need me to play the role of the ideal daughter. She just needed me to be me. And that was enough. I worked freelance. Not much money, but enough to get by. I started saving, not for anyone else, not in case the family needs it, not to cover some medical emergency for a relative I only heard about through a forwarded appointment email. I saved for me. For the dreams I once shelved because others called them frivolous. I bought a proper kettle, a pale blue bed sheet set, and a small desk lamp with warm yellow light, because I wanted to, not because someone said, "You should get this." No one asked anymore why my lights were still on at 2 a.m. No one scolded me for eating dinner late or baking bread at midnight. I could write until dawn, play classical music or EDM or total silence, and no one commented on my schedule or told me I should live more healthily. I could leave dishes in the sink until morning. Eat cookies instead of dinner. Step out of the house without informing anyone. And no one used that against me to claim I was inconsiderate. I bought a small dining table on Marketplace. The seller was an elderly woman from the outskirts of Fort Worth, widowed 6 months ago, trying to downsize. I rented a truck and picked it up myself. On the drive home, I thought, this is the first time I've picked out a piece of furniture not because Mom would like it or my sister and I could share it, but simply because I liked it. I assembled the table myself. Not smoothly. Not quickly. Every screw was slightly off. Some I had to undo and redo 3 times. At one point I nearly lost it over a wobbly leg that refused to tighten, no matter how hard I tried. But in the end, the table stood. No wobble. No collapse. And in that moment, as I sat and looked at it, I realized, so did I. Not perfect. Not precise. Not pretty by everyone's standards. But still standing. I had my first dinner at that table, a plate of cold pasta and a glass of cheap wine. Olive jumped into the chair across from me. I looked at her and laughed to myself, maybe you're the only family I've got left. She meowed once, stretched out her legs across the edge of the table like she agreed. That night, I didn't lock my bedroom door. Didn't leave the hallway light on. Didn't check my phone 3 times before sleeping. I wasn't waiting for a reconciliation message. Wasn't hoping for a call saying we miss you. I didn't need an apology anymore to validate my worth. I don't know what tomorrow will look like. I'm not ready to say I've fully healed. But I do know that, at least right now, I'm no longer living as a supporting character in someone else's story. I no longer sit in my own home feeling like a guest. For the first time in my life, I'm living without asking for permission. And maybe, just maybe, that's what freedom really means. I used to think freedom would arrive with cheers, on a sunny day, with doors flinging open like in the movies. But it didn't. Freedom came quietly. Like an empty space where no one asks you anymore, when will you pay, when are you coming back, why are you like this? Freedom came when I realized, no one was grabbing my shoulders anymore, not to hug, but to steer me in the direction they preferred. Freedom, for me, was eating dinner without worrying someone would complain. It was no longer having to check my phone at midnight to see if some family emergency needed fixing. It was not having to prove my worth by handing over money, enduring in silence, or keeping the peace at the cost of myself. And I've learned this. If people only love you when you're useful, that's not love. That's a transaction. And transactions can end. You are allowed to end them. No one is born to be the life raft for the entire family, only to be tossed aside once they no longer need to swim. No one is obligated to be the reasonable one to the point of swallowing their own tears just to keep dinner from falling apart. You can forgive. But forgiving doesn't mean returning to the same table where you always pour the water and no one ever invites you to raise a glass. And what about you? Was there a moment when you realized, if I stay, I will disappear from my own life? Have you ever stayed silent so long that you forgot what your real voice sounds like? Have you ever felt scared, not because your family turned away, but because for the first time, you did? If so, say something. Say it in one line. Say it with "I get it." Or even just a period. Because maybe, the story you've never told is the key someone else has been waiting for. And if you're sitting in a dark room right now, thinking you're the only one who's ever been called ungrateful just for stopping the sacrifice, then welcome to Family Ashes. Here, no one asks you to understand others before you're allowed to live for yourself.